This video will explore the concept of plagiarism, something you're at risk of when you conduct research. Research is the systematic investigation into and the study of materials and sources in order to establish facts and reach new conclusions. You might be trying to support your ideas with research. You might be trying to find out new information with your research, but basically you're looking into new information to use within your own work. It's good to conduct research. It helps you learn more about a topic, and it gives you evidence that you can use as proof, adds to your credibility as an author. However, when you conduct research, you're at risk of plagiarism. Plagiarism is the practice of taking someone else's work or someone else's ideas and passing them off as your own. It's considered a very serious offense because it's basically intellectual theft. You're stealing someone's ideas. There are grave consequences in high school and college for this, and there's legal consequences in the workforce. So we want to make sure you understand both what plagiarism is as well as how you can avoid it. Here are some case scenarios. I want you to consider the question, is this plagiarism? First scenario, copying or sharing assignments. Go ahead and answer the question, do you think this is plagiarism? The correct answer in this case would be yes, it is plagiarism because you are passing off someone else's work as your own. You took someone else's ideas, whoever you copied from or shared with, and you're passing them off as your ideas, even though they're not. How about this one? Number 2, failing to cite a commonly known source, like Wikipedia. Let's say you browsed, you found some information, and you don't actually cite this. Is this plagiarism? Go ahead and answer the question now. In this case, it depends. Most likely, yes it is. Even a source as common as Wikipedia, you do need to cite because again, it's not your information, you took it from somewhere else. The one exception to this would be something so commonly known that it's considered common knowledge and not something that you need to cite. But this would be like, for example, that the American flag's colors are red, white, and blue. That's something so commonly known in our country that we wouldn't need to cite that information. When in doubt, however, cite it. Third scenario, failing to cite a statistic. Let's say you use a number. If you don't cite where that came from, is that plagiarism? Correct answer, yes it is. Anytime you use someone else's ideas, in this case, their numbers that they found through a study, for example, you do need to cite that source to tell your reader where that information came from and show that it's not your own idea. Scenario 4, let's say you paraphrase, you put in your own words the work of others that you found maybe in books or on websites without documentation. Is this plagiarism? Yes, this is plagiarism specifically for that last part, without documentation. It's good to paraphrase and use others' ideas to support your own. However, you must cite your sources when you do this. Scenario 5, asking another student to write a paper for you. Do you think that this is plagiarism? In this case, yes it is. You have taken someone else's work, whoever's writing that paper, and you're passing it off as your own. Even if they gave you permission to use something, for example, it is still plagiarism because it's not your own work, it's not your ideas, they belong to someone else. In this case, even if you cited them, unless you've talked to your teacher first, really bad idea, yes, blatant example of plagiarism. Scenario 6 here, copying material from another source, citing the material in your bibliography, but leaving out an in-text citation. Is this plagiarism? Yes. This may seem like a tricky one, but it is indeed plagiarism. When you cite, you need to cite twice. You cite once in your bibliography or your works cited page. You also need to cite within the paragraph where you use that information. It's a much briefer citation, usually author's last name and page number, for example. But that small citation shows two things. First, it shows that idea in the paragraph is not your own. It came from someone else. Secondly, it shows a quick reference point for someone to look up in your works cited page the full citation so they can find the original source if they want to go look up where you took that information from. Here's an example. You can see the circles on the left by the title of the article if there's no author, or usually the author's last name. Over on the right in the Works Cited page, I could actually find which particular article that citation comes from. So when we're looking for information and we wonder where that came from, here's the original source that we could follow up with. Scenario 7 here, listing works in your bibliography that you have not used or read. Put them in there on your Works Cited page, but you didn't actually read them. Is that plagiarism? Not a good idea, but not necessarily plagiarism. You're not passing off someone's work as your own, but you are kind of making it seem like you've done work that you actually haven't. So when you think about your works cited, or sometimes you'll have a works consulted, even if you didn't cite them, you're only listing the works that you've read or drawn from within your assignments to show your teacher or your audience, whoever that might be, where the original ideas come from. Number 8, mixing the words of an author with your own without documentation. Is this plagiarism? Yes, this is plagiarism, specifically for that phrase, without documentation. Anytime you use someone else's ideas, even if you mix them with your own, you do need to cite your sources. Again, when in doubt, you cite. So let's talk about some examples of plagiarism. I'm going to list them here for you. Buying, stealing, or borrowing a paper. These would be key examples of taking someone else's work and passing it off as your own. Definitely plagiarism. Having someone else write your paper for you. Again, that's taking someone else's ideas and passing them off as your own. We call it cheating usually, but it is a specific case of plagiarism as well. Copying large sections of a text without quotation marks or proper citation. We're at risk of doing this, especially when we use the internet. You found a lot of information, you copy and paste some of that, and you drop it in there without using quotation marks to show it and without citing it to show where it came from. That's an example of plagiarism. Here's a tricky one. Using the words of a source too closely when paraphrasing. When you try and put it in your own words, you really need to make sure they're your own words. Not that you've just taken a couple words and reworded them and kept the structure, but that you've actually taken the original ideas and rephrased them, reordered them to be your own. We're going to practice this in class. Building on someone's ideas without citing their work, even if you're adding to it. Because you've taken those original ideas, even though you're somehow changing them or adapting them, you still need to cite. Anytime you're borrowing without citing, that's an example of plagiarism. Again, plagiarism is considered theft or cheating. You've taken someone else's work, you're passing it off as your own, you're basically stealing their ideas, and the consequences can be severe. The middle school policy, for example, plagiarism is a direct consequence of being, or as a direct consequence, sent to Mr. Haugsy, reported to the office. Something so severe that it's not something that just a teacher will handle, but that Mr. Haugsy, principal, also needs to be aware of this. Parents get contacted, etc. High school policy. On the first offense of plagiarism, I'm skipping down here to this middle part, it's reported both to principal and parent. It's added to your school record, and you earn a failing grade, an F, on the plagiarized assignment. If it happens again in any course, so it's not the second time in a class, at any course in your career, if you have a second offense of plagiarism, you're dropped from the course with a failing grade. You get an F for the class, and it's dropped. You cannot continue in that course. In the legal world, let me back up for a minute, it's much more severe. You'll have lawsuits, for example, getting sued for stealing someone's idea. So the idea is we don't want to be plagiarizing, and we want to teach you how to avoid plagiarism. And we're going to talk specifically about 3 different ways you can use information from research without plagiarizing, how you can use them appropriately. And I'll talk kind of about the triangle from the most specific to the most general. So the most specific way, the top of the triangle, is using quotations. The most specific way to use information is to use the actual words, the original words, in quotation marks to show that they're someone else's words in this case. This is especially useful if you're trying to quote an expert, or you just simply can't find a way to say it any better than how they presented it. Another example that we'll talk about in more detail soon is paraphrasing, where you are taking a passage and putting it in your own words, taking that original wording and somehow restructuring it, reorganizing it, and rewording it to be your own. Last example is summarizing. most general example where you're taking just the main idea of a work, not specific ideas, just the main overall arching idea, and putting it into your own words. All of these, whether you quote, paraphrase, or summarize, all of these must be attributed to the original author or source. In other words, you need to cite. Give credit, because these are not your ideas. They originally belonged to someone else. Paraphrasing is the method that we're going to focus on the most. Preferred method because you're taking a passage, you put it in your own words. This allows you to understand the information. You can't just copy and paste it, you're actually processing it, thinking about it, trying to figure out what it means and how you might use it within your own ideas. It also keeps you from quoting too much, a risk if you again are copying and pasting someone else's words and suddenly your paper is filled with so many quotations that there's more of someone else's ideas than your own within your writing. Also, paraphrasing can give your paper solid evidence or proof to support your ideas. It's good to back your ideas up with someone else's work when it's a credible source that helps you show proof why we should side with you or why we should respect the ideas that you've presented within your work. So we'll talk a lot about paraphrasing and we'll practice paraphrasing, effective paraphrasing, to help you avoid plagiarism and yet use solid research or evidence within your work to support your ideas.